In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Curious Dimension podcast. I am your host, Matt Barone. I want to thank everybody that's been following me on all of the social media platforms, the YouTube channel, Instagram. If you guys have a second, please hit that like button, that subscribe button, and leave a comment at the end. I'd love to hear from you guys. One of my favorite things to do is interact with the fans. My guest today is Lucy Pringle. Lucy is one of the world's leading crop circle photographers. She has supplied images for the double-sided tribute album CD of the 40th anniversary tribute album to Led Zeppelin's 2009. Her images have also been used and continue to be used worldwide on TV, in films, books, and magazines. Lucy Pringle was educated in England, France, and Switzerland, and has traveled widely, spending 12 years in Jamaica, where her elder son was born. She is a founding member of the Center for Crop Circle Studies. She is widely known and is an international authority on the subject and the pioneer research into the effects of electromagnetic fields on living systems. This includes the physiological, the psychological effects reported by over 800 people after visiting or being in the vicinity of a crop formation. She also studied the effects on animal behavior, remote effects, luminosities, mechanical failures, and audio effects. Her research shows measured changes in the human hormones following short exposure to the circles, also changes in brain activity. In addition, due to potentially important recent findings, the focus of her research will be directed toward establishing a possible link with Parkinson's disease. More research is needed to evaluate the link between these subtle energies and living systems. I had a great time talking with Lucy today. She's a wealth of knowledge on these topics. Without further ado, here's Lucy Pringle. How are you today?
Pretty good, thank you. And you?
Yes, I'm very good. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you. I've got a lot of notes here. I know you've got some experience with this crop circle phenomenon.
I have. I was working out the other day, actively involved in it when I was one of the founder members of the Center for Crop Circle Studies, which really started the whole thing going worldwide.
What year was that?
1990, and it was an academic society, really, to get the subject looked at in an academic way, to give it foundations, not just being something that happened, something for which there seemed to be a need for intense research.
Yeah. And how did you find this particular topic, this phenomenon to begin with?
How did I find it? I suppose I'd always been interested in the unexplained, right from I can remember when I was a child. And this was pretty much on my doorstep. And I became extremely interested in it. We were very naive in those days. We wanted to know more and more. It was something completely and utterly new. And you had the Doug and Dave saga, which the people who were frightened, and a lot of people are frightened of this phenomenon, they still cling to it now, even now. And the press, they always try and interview the people, the hoaxers, and there certainly are hoaxers, and some of them are extremely good. But they don't want to know. I've sent several scientific articles or pieces up to the various news outlets, and they don't want to know. And so I'm very careful how I speak about it when I'm at parties or whatever. I keep this side of my life pretty quiet. But in fact, a lot of people know that I am interested in it. And I was talking to one person who was extremely clever, and he was very interested in the brain. And so I couldn't resist it, because that's part of my investigation, my work too, with Parkinson's. So I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Lucy, you don't understand." He said, "Many of the very best brains are actually very interested in this phenomenon."
Really?
So I thought, yes, indeed. I said, really? And I think they keep it quiet too.
Mhm.
But I certainly work with a lot of very big brains, and they're kind enough to take me on board.
For sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
a, sci- I'm not a scientist, but on my father's side, they're all absolutely brilliant scientists. So it's obviously somewhere in my DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to get into some of your research and your case studies that you've done with some of these ailments, these diseases that show temporary healings, and in some other cases, permanent healings. I wonder if maybe we could start with some of your case studies with Parkinson's. I know you have a story where you took a friend, I believe, into the Taurus knot. Do you have that
Oh, yes,
story?
that was in 1997. That was Mary Davis. She was a very good friend of mine, and she'd had Parkinson's for a long time.
And
And
I'm going to pull up that real quick. Can you see that there? Is that the one?
yes, 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 it's a dreadful condition. And she was fascinated in this phenomenon. And she said she'd really love to visit one. And I said, the trouble is that you don't always feel well. In fact, I said, sometimes people feel extremely ill and when they're inside a crop circle. And I said, you're not well as it is. And I'm afraid I really don't think I can take the responsibility for you to visit one. Anyhow, she begged and begged. And I said, listen, I tell you what, next year, if I find one which I find to be as nearly 100% beneficial, then I said, I'll tell you about it. And it'll be your complete responsibility. And so this one appeared in July 1997. And I made a point of going into it every single day for a week. And that meant driving down from Hampshire all the way down there. And I felt fine. And I stood at the edge of the field. Masses of people were going in. And I would ask them as they came out to tell me how they felt. And I've been doing this since the 1990s. I started collecting reports from people in actually 1990. And I now have 846 reports. I just looked the other day of how people have felt. And I can tell you it's a very mixed bag of how people have reacted to being inside. Anyhow, they all said they felt wonderful. In the meantime, I'd taken in a biographer and a naturalist, Duff Hart Davis, who incidentally, I believe, wrote the book for Peter de la Villiers. I don't know if you have heard of him. Anyhow, he was in the army. But Duff was a righto skeptic. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see, that was on a slope. And
Wow.
I took him up to the top of the circle, and he looked down and he said, but I can't see the bottom of the circle. How can anybody make that with such geometric precision when they can't see what they're doing below? When you're starting off at the top, you've got to see what you're doing, the lay of the land. He said, that's impossible. I thought to myself, another convert. Anyhow, I said to Mary, I think this is the one for you. She went in with a friend and she sat in the center. It was very hard to say where, but that was the center. And she said, about 20 minutes they sat there. But another very strange thing, Matt, is that in a genuine circle, there's a well-known loss of time when you're inside the circle. And in fact, I went into one about 5 years ago with one of my godchildren. And we sat and chatted, and I thought we'd been in there for about 20 minutes. And when we came out, somebody said to me, "Do you know how long you've been in there?" And I said, about 20 minutes. And they said, "No, you've been in there an hour and a half." So Mary sat in there for what she says is about 20 minutes. I think it was probably much longer. And what happened was that she stopped shaking. And she stopped shaking not just for a few seconds or a few minutes. she stopped shaking for 24 hours. Now, I'm sure you've met people with Parkinson's, and you've seen how they shake.
Yeah, the dyskinesia.
It's continuous, and it's terribly debilitating and exhausting. And to have a remission like that for 24 hours is totally and utterly unheard of. That's what started me on my quest to research what on earth was happening in the fields, in the genuine circles.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick second to thank everybody who's been tuning into the shows. If you haven't already hit that like button or hammered that subscribe button, please do that now. It really helps the algorithm to let this show reach a wider audience. And yeah, please leave me a comment in the bottom. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Much love, guys.
And we were finding one of the tests we did was Hazel Drummond, who was working with NutriHealth, would really measure the endocrine system at various acupuncture points. And she found 1 year, she was saying that if she has a group of maybe 8 or 10 people, if maybe 3 people show a change in the same area, then she said that's unusual. But in this one particular circle, 6 or 7 people out of, I think it was 12, had an increase in gamma. Now, gamma is 34 to 72 hertz per second. It's very powerful. And I was giving a talk nearby 1 year, and there happened to be some Parkinson sufferers present. And one of them said, please ring a neurologist who's in the Midlands. I think it might have been Leicestershire or somewhere, and have a chat to him. And I'm not a scientist, even though maybe it's in my DNA. I still don't have any letters after my name or anything like that. It's pretty nerve-wracking. And it took me a good 2 weeks to summon up enough courage, because they could say, do you know what you're talking about? And I would have to say, basically, these are the findings, but apart from that, I don't know. So anyhow, I felt brave one morning, so I thought, whilst this courage is there, I'll grab the telephone. And lo and behold, I got the scientist himself, the neurologist himself. So I thought, oh, crumbs. So I told him really what the story was. And he said, now, Lucy, this is extremely interesting, because I'm finding that when I raise the brain activity of my Parkinson sufferers into the gamma level of brain activity, it inhibits their dyskinesia, i.e., they stop shaking. He said, we're both on the same line of research. Matt, that was thrilling, because I knew that we were, as he said, on the right track. And I've now been working with, sadly, Hazel herself has developed Parkinson's. Yes, just recently. So I'm now working with a neuroscientist, and we do various aspects of research. We've done, I think you were interested in the glabella test.
Yeah, so maybe you could explain to people what that test is and how they use that in Parkinson's.
The glabella test is you want an area which is just between your eyebrows, and that's known as really the third eye. And if you tap there, most people blink. But Parkinson suffers, but if you, after a few goes, you can stop yourself blinking. Parkinson sufferers can't. They simply can't control the blinking. And we've done tremor tests, because also another area is testing essential tremor sufferers. And those are people who shake just as badly. Sometimes Parkinson sufferers don't shake. In fact, one of my guinea pigs last year, she had the type where you actually don't shake. I think there are 4 types of Parkinson's. Anyhow, the essential tremor is quite absolutely fascinating. I'm just going to show you something. I hope it's going to come over
Hmm.
all right. The tremor tests were very interesting. One of my guinea pigs is called Tina Martin, and she still would be if she had the ability. She wrote a little book called Holy Wells,
Mm.
and the script is on one side, and I don't know if you can see the drawings on the other side.
Yes, I can see it.
She was using the finest nib to do those.
She drew that.
She drew that. She wrote the book, and she did those absolutely amazing drawings, which it takes the very finest nib.
Yes.
It's brilliant art. Now, this is what happens. It was she who suggested it to me. She said, why don't all of us just write a brief sentence like the cat sat on the mat before we go into the circle, repeat it inside, and then repeat it again afterwards when we're outside the circle. And this, I don't know again if you can see.
Yes, that's in your book. I read that the other day. I saw that.
Well, this is a different one.
Oh, okay.
This was last year.
Oh, this is just last year.
Yes, this is 1010. Now, this one, can you see is in the circle?
Yeah, so that one's a little bit better in the circle.
A little better. But when she'd been in her circle, look what happens.
Oh, wow.
She could write properly. And she was so excited. She said, I can't stop writing because I can write. And she was so thrilled, as you can imagine. But then, let me show you what happened. This is at 4 p.m.
I can see it.
And then later on,
Yes.
you can't read a thing. So what is it that happens in the circle that has that effect?
That's the question.
That is a very big question. And also people have shown the tremor, that just demonstrates how the tremor changes and gets better. We do various tests. We do the rate of the encephalogram and also the heart rate variability. This was his conclusions from last year. The tremor measurements using a smartphone sensors were not suitable for recording alters with intention. Eye movements, EOG, also weren't exactly appropriate because we've had some very strange results over the years with eye movements because Parkinson sufferers, their eye movements are quite different from ours. We have a sort of fairly smooth curve, but Parkinson sufferers are all jaggedy and go up at peaks. And one year we were doing this particular test, and it showed dramatic differences in the Parkinson sufferers' eye tests. The one that he likes is the EEG, which is the electroencephalogram, and that he feels we should continue investigating. And also the heart rate variability. He says it's the best way to monitor both physiological and mental changes. Whilst we're getting these results, I'm an optimist, Matt. If something like this is happening, what is happening? Why is it happening? And just as the gravity was a result of an apple falling off a tree, why shouldn't something as far-reached as Parkinson's that's happening on the ground be able to further research into Parkinson's? And I must say I'm completely driven by this because whilst we're getting these results, actually it was very interesting one year because I was told of a circle that had just appeared overnight. And I said, let's go into that because it'll be really fresh. And the energies, what seems to happen is that when people go in, they act rather like blotting paper and they soak up the energies. And the energies won't be as strong as they were initially. Anyhow, so I thought the energies are going to be really strong in this newly discovered one. And we went in there and did all the tests. The tests consist of certain tests, and those are done outside the circle in the study center or somewhere like that. We then go into the circle and repeat the test. We then go outside the circle, some way from the circle, and again repeat the test. So what we have are 3 tests, identical tests, so that we can compare them, that the scientists can compare them and analyze.
Very interesting.
Therefore, when we went into this one, which was new, and we conducted all the tests and everything, I had a lot of people, a lot of different scientists there, because I always invite other scientists if they want to do their particular research. And afterwards, there was absolutely no difference whatsoever. So this is extraordinary. What on earth has happened? And then I was told it had been man-made.
Interesting.
Wasn't it? This was something I'd wanted to do, but I could never really do it unless I could do it blind. And that happened.
And so that's interesting because that's like the placebo test, then I imagine, because if it's man-made, maybe there's some energies beneath the ground that we don't quite understand yet. But if we know that it's man-made, we can rule out some other things, and maybe there's a placebo effect happening. Have you guys considered that, I'm sure?
Oh, certainly. But you see, what happens when people tend to forget that Earth is a living, breathing thing. Oh, I forget who it was who actually called it Gaia. So you're dealing with a living, breathing item, right? So a lot is happening in the ground, and especially if you're on energy lines or ley lines, and even more so if you're on what I call the nodal points, where the energy lines meet and they cross. Those are really powerful, and very often that is where a crop circle lands.
Not random, is it?
Yes, so there's some attraction.
Yeah. I'd love to
The-
talk about the eddy currents and how that affects the brain. I know you've done a little bit of work studying that. Can you speak to the eddy currents a little bit?
What do you mean by the eddy currents?
Eddy currents, aren't there currents of energy known as eddy currents that interact with the human brain? And you were showing.
Oh, I think actually we're talking about the same thing.
Oh, okay.
We
Yes,
call them
okay, so-
energy lines or ley lines. Oh, yes, they have a big effect on the person and the person's metabolism. And you get the same thing, funny enough, at sacred sites. There's been several books written, one by Peter Knight, which was talking about the behavioral results of people when they get in within the energy.
Let's talk about that for a second. So you're talking about psychological effects that help people after they've been in a formation. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm not sure that we are. I'm talking about when you get within the energy of the circle. And Hazel Drummond, who was doing the endocrine system test, we were going into one particular circle, and she, as soon as we got within its aura, her knees went weak. And she said, I'm now entering the aura of the circle. So this is just, we live in an electric world, and we are electric beings. And the energy, the radius of the energy around us, our aura, it's the aura. And if we don't feel too well, our aura can be diminished. And if we're very well, maybe it's increased, etc. But we all have an aura. And a crop circle also has an aura, or a field of energy around it. And some people can feel exactly when they're actually entering the field of energy.
And that's been, I don't know if that's been theorized or proven, but is that a toroidal energy? They think that's what these fields of energy are. They're in toroidal patterns.
In what patterns?
Toroidal, like a torus
yes.
pattern.
Well, it can do. Yes, indeed. Yes, that's just like the torus knot. Yes. Yes, and certainly they can form in different patterns.
Very interesting. There is one there's a bunch of formations that I love to talk about with you. There's one I'd love to bring up now that I think an astrophysicist decoded. Mike Reed, are you familiar with that formation that depicts pi? Let me know if you can see this formation. Can you see that one?
No. Oh, that one. Oh, that
Yes.
was pi. Pi to the power of 9.
And this one's very interesting. Can you tell the story? How did Mike Reed, Dr. Mike Reed, the astrophysicist, how did he come across this? And
He must have been interested in the phenomenon. He must have been following the phenomenon. And when he saw that, he was actually doing a lot of research. He was working with the Smithsonian Institute on the MNT, which is a multi-mirror telescope. And it was he who first decoded that. And in fact, a friend of mine, he did a very, very rough drawing of a sort of pie chart. And he split it into all the different sections of the pie chart. And he found that it was pi to the power of 9. There is a diagram. Unfortunately, we don't have that diagram handy because it's really interesting. It was him, was the very first person. And at the top, you can see those little circles, 3 little circles. Those are called ellipses, not ellipses. It's ellipsis. And that's a geometric term for and so on. And of course, pi is and so on.
and transcendental. I love the way he decoded this one by sectioning this off into 10 units, and then he could measure the different arc lengths. And then there's even a little circle there that represents the decimal point.
Yes, indeed, that tiny little circle. So you have 3. No, it's because there were 3 divisions there in the first little arc there. And so you have 3 point, and then 0.1, and then and so on and so forth.
Yeah. This is a very clever way. Do you know the story behind this one? How long it took to be discovered? Did you go in this one?
I did indeed. And I
Wow.
buried my bottles of water in it.
Oh,
Because
you
this
said
is
bottles of water. Let's talk about your bottles of water, because I know I read that in your book where you were doing controls of different water. And then what were you doing to analyze the water?
this was where Jim Lyons, with whom he contributed to the book in a large, helpful way. He was a chartered engineer, and he was really concentrating on the aerospace industry. But he's an absolute mega brain. This was my very first line of research. I felt that water is a unique substance. It's got completely different characteristics to almost anything else, and we're all full of water. Babies, I think, are 70% water. They have more water than anybody else, and men have more water content than women. I think you've got 65 and we have 50 or something like that. Anyhow, it's fascinating, and it's got all sorts of qualities and characteristics. And so I said to myself, if anything might show a difference between inside and outside, let's have a go at water. Dr. Cyril Smith, who was an electromagnetic engineer, electrical engineer, wrote the Electromagnetic Man, I think that was what he wrote. Anyhow, he said, very good idea, and he was happy to test them. And he's told me to use Volvic water, because that doesn't go above 4 hertz. And it's very important that you're working with a constant base. What I did, I had tiny little bottles that I'd get from the chemist, and I'd tape around the top, and I'd write a little label on them, etc. And I would bury the control samples first, and then would go into the circle, bury the bottles in there, and then when I came to collect them, which turned into a dowsing
Exercise.
way to find them, I would collect the bottles inside the circle first and the control sample second. And in that way, the control samples were never anywhere near the circles inside. So there was no energy. They never went inside the circle. And then they were sent to various laboratories to be tested. And I get the results back. And every single one, including, I'm sure quite a lot of your listeners will have heard of Dr. Jacques Benveniste. He was a biologist in France, and he was the man to prove that water had a memory. Now, at the time, his work was completely disregarded. And in fact, he came in heavily for criticism. And in fact, the government stopped his grant. And it wasn't until after he died that they realized his work was absolutely exemplary, that it was absolutely perfect. And indeed, he proved it quite successfully. He found such a difference in the test in the water that he had to repeat the tests, and he tested them on living material, which I'm not going to go into. And then there was one particular circle where it was at Vernon Dean. In fact, you had the picture of that.
Which one? Upcut Rose?
No, this was Vernon Dean.
Let me see if I can find it.
It had a lot. It was a square.
Oh, hang on. Let me know if it's this one here. Let me know when you can see it. That one?
Yes, spot on.
Okay. Yep.
No, it wasn't square. We had a square in the middle. It was a most extraordinary circle. And this was the one when Hazel Drummond was walking up the hill towards it when her knees went weak. And this was a dip, a bowl in the countryside. And the Romans used to march along there. It was a Roman occupied part of England at that time by the Romans. Anyhow, I was there with a whole lot of people doing the tests. But Christopher Weeks, he and I have worked together for a long time. We were burying the bottles. And there was one place, and I can't tell you exactly where it was, but there was one place, say it was there, where everybody felt well. If you moved off that space, golly, you felt ill. So Christopher and I, we had to bury the bottles. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you, by the time we'd finished, we felt absolutely green about the gills. And in fact, he said he didn't dare go into the center because he felt he was being drawn down like water down a plug hole. It was a most extraordinary circle. And when we came to collect the bottles, we were both extremely nervous. How were we going to feel? I think it was about 10 days later, we went in with a great deal of trepidation, and we felt absolutely fine. The energies had gone. There'd been a lot of people going in there, and the energies had gone to a very large extent. We felt absolutely fine. But I sent the results up to Jim Lyons, who sent them on to a particular lab, and the results came back. Absolutely extraordinary results was that because ammonia was found in the water.
Now, how does that happen?
Ammonia doesn't exist in any bottled water at all.
So how does that happen?
So this is what Jim says. The first thing to notice is the correlation between the nitrate and ammonia results. It seems as though there is some breakdown of water into its constituent parts, namely hydrogen and oxygen. These molecules then attach to 3 nitrogen atoms, creating both increased nitrate NO3 and ammonia NH3. This is an interesting finding.
Very interesting. So somehow it's being transmuted.
No, yeah, exactly. There's been some sort of chemical reaction.
That is very interesting.
He's a brilliant dowser too, and he's a thoroughly nice man. And he's going to come with he's been trying various techniques that would not be considered scientifically viable, but he's been trying. He's open to anything. He's to help with his eyes. And he said to me the other day, because I keep in touch, oh, they seem to be getting a bit better, Lucy. At least both eyes are working together.
Yeah.
And he's going to try attend the scientific research day, and his wife will bring him down. But whether it's a long way, he lives in York, and it's a long way for them to come. They might, if they did, they'd probably spend the night in the area where we're going to work. But whether he's been trying to come down for several years now, and it's a last moment, it's just too difficult.
Yeah. You mentioned something about the dowsing. I don't know that much about dowsing. I know what it is. And I've reached out to some people about this particular thing that people can do to locate water. What has been your experience with dowsing? Maybe you could just tell people what it is real quick, and then what have been some of your experiences?
Really finding the energy lines. Our planet is full of a network of energy lines running through and where the animals know about them. The elephants, their tracks are on energy lines. The birds fly along energy lines. They're everywhere. And whereas animals and birds can detect them, very few human beings can. Some people can just use their hands and be walking along and say, I'm walking on an energy line, or now I found a nodal point. And there are all sorts of different names for the different construction of the energy lines. They're absolutely vital. They're full of electricity. And a lot of people, they can be used in many ways, finding water, finding oil. I was once asked to douse somebody's house because he wasn't well at all and he was sleeping badly and he just felt absolutely rotten. I went upstairs to his bedroom and I started at the window and I walked toward his bed. And as I reached his bed, I felt terrible. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I came off the spot as quickly as I could. And then I went downstairs and his bed was over where he sat down below in his chair. He was absolutely sitting on this bad line, really wherever he was resting. And no wonder he was feeling ill. You use it for many reasons, and it should always be used with the greatest care and integrity. Don't go and try and find the winner of the Kentucky Derby or anything like that, because it'll lie to you. It gets annoyed. It's used for just really the correct reasons. And you could start doing it. You could even get a pair of coat hangers and cut off a bit of it so that you've got a line and a fork at the top, and the major part is the straight line, and then you cut the bit off at the top so you've got a handle, and you go along and you can wait to see if you ask it a question and see when the line crosses like that, the rods cross.
Do they have to be copper?
No, it doesn't have to be. It can be steel. It can be anything. I've used my handbag, for goodness sakes.
Really? That is wild.
I remember getting a story years and years ago of a friend called David Russell who'd flown over the circles not far from the fields, not far from where I lived, and he'd found a circle. And he'd gone up the next day to find it because he said, when you're seeing it from the air, you can see it quite clearly. When you're on the ground, you're on the level and you can't see it at all. And he just wanted to pinpoint where it was. So I went along with him and his wife and then somebody else who was also a dowser. And we were walking along and I hadn't brought my rods with me. And I got the most crashing headache. And I stopped and shook my head. And I said, I'm going down that tram line there because I think that's where the circle is. And David said, no, he said, it's not. And he went off in another direction. Anyhow, the others came with me. And we walked down the tram line, and I thought, God, I got all this wrong. And I still had this horrible headache. And suddenly we stepped inside the circle, and my headache went. My headache had acted as my head had acted as the dowsing rod. I've been very grateful, and I've been very grateful that it hasn't done it since. Wasn't that extraordinary?
I've heard people say they use their bodies as a way to locate certain things or just to feel certain energy points.
Yes.
So I've never experienced anything like that, but you're not the first person that said that to me
Yes.
on this show.
Yes, so that was in fact very useful, the way that actually worked. But it
Yeah.
wasn't pleasant.
It's fascinating. I'd love to talk about some of the strange animal occurrences around these
Oh,
formations. I know
yes.
you wrote about that because that's interesting to me that the birds do certain things. I know you wrote about how some birds have the magnetite within their blood vessels. Could you talk a little bit about the animal occurrences?
There's been a huge amount. There was one really rather unpleasant one. Christopher Weeks, again, who I just mentioned, he rang me in the early days. This, I think, was in the 90s. And it was 8 o'clock at night or something. And he said, Lucy, I found the most extraordinary something, he said, in a circle in the field. And there's all blood and feathers and everything. Actually, the one's feathers. He said, can you come and have a look? And I said, it's going to be dark by the time I get there. Why don't we look tomorrow morning? So we met. And in the circle, with just what she'd said, a whole mass of blood. And when I parted the crop right down to the ground, it went down to the ground, little tiny minute bits of flesh, blood and everything. It was really extraordinary. And it had a circle with an outer ring. And in the outer ring, there was a dead pigeon. And you could see very clearly that was a pigeon. We took samples, sent it down to a biologist down, I think, in Cornwall or Devon, and the report came back saying he thought it was a pigeon, but he thought it was already dead when it exploded. He said, this has exploded. And he said he thought it was already dead. Now then, what has happened? Why? Goodness me. So I went there several times because I've got this wretchedly inquiring mind. Actually, I'm very grateful for it. And I approached the circle in a different angle. And as I was walking down the tram lines, I found a dead pigeon. Oh, I know what's happened. They'd been pigeon shooting, and that one they hadn't found it. They'd shot it, but they hadn't found it. And this will just give you an indication of the force. When the circle appeared, the force of the phenomenon had exploded the dead bird. And that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with.
And have you observed, like, when flocks of birds fly over them, they'll go around it?
Yes, that's another interesting one. That doesn't have any blood or gore attached to it. But this was in Canada, when a skein of geese, I think it was, were flying. And they came towards a circle. And instead of flying directly over it, they parted.
Mhm.
They parted, the skein parted. And half went one side and half went the other.
Very interesting.
They didn't want to. And there was another story, which I didn't include, of a woman who was riding. And she came towards the circle, and somebody was in the circle, and the horse just wouldn't go into the circle at all.
Wouldn't have it.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, there is something weird going on there with animals. Obviously, they have a little bit different biology than we have, but maybe they have some extra ways of perceiving or sensing things that are
They're much more sensitive than we are to the natural world.
interesting. Very interesting.
And the subtle energies, what we're dealing with really are subtle energies.
Yes, I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Rupert Sheldrake.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, he's done some amazing work in this. I actually interviewed his wife, Jill Peirce. She does healing voice and living mandala work. But I think they're both, I think, barking up the same tree and approaching it from different avenues. He's more scientific, and there's lots of evidence to suggest there are these subtle energies that we don't quite understand that maybe have very big applications and benefits.
Yes.
But
She's
I said this to someone else. I think people like yourself and these other researchers that I've interviewed, I think you guys are going to be sparking the brains that's going to launch a product, technology, or something in the future that will radically change human beings in a positive way. Can you speak to some of that research that's happening now?
I look upon the circles as being positive. They never force themselves upon you. You either go with them or you don't. And I think they've actually contributed a lot. They've certainly educated me to a very great degree because there's so many different angles to the circles, the mathematics, the geometry, the art. This is one of the greatest art forms have been in the last 2,000 years, and this is just extraordinary. They increase people's sensitivity. As a race, we're quite reserved. We don't chat to people normally. You're sitting in a train, and you're probably got hidden behind a newspaper, and you're not talking to your next-door neighbor. You go into a circle, and you're all talking together. Perfect strangers. It's wonderful. And it's uplifting and it's extraordinary. And I can't quite exactly tell you. You can go almost into another world, a different level of consciousness. It's a feeling which is, you have to experience it yourself. And I take tours in the summer and I always have people who, they just can't believe it. It's something so different in their lives and it's just wonderful for them. Now there's one circle where, because an awful lot of people feel well, but as I was saying, in one or two, you feel very ill. And there was one circle, which you've also got a picture of that. It's a whole lot of circles.
Oh, that was the next one I wanted to bring up. Let me pull that one up.
Oh.
Are you talking about the 777?
No, not the 777, no.
Oh.
Oh, yes, I am. Yes, hold on, that's exactly it. It's the 777. Yes, it's
Okay.
exactly right.
Let me pull that one up real quick because I'm kicking myself because I had Gary King on the show. And
That's it.
Yep. I had Gary King on the show and I blew it. I should have had him tell the story because he was there. But can you talk about this one?
I'm talking about it from the physical point of view. I did my test. We did the scientific tests in there. And I can't tell you exactly which circle we were in. But Hazel Drummond, who was doing the endocrine system, she skipped around literally like a child. She said, I've never skipped around like this since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And so we all felt extremely well in there. But that night, somebody else had been in there, and she was in there the very first day it formed. And she suffered the most excruciating pain that night. She had to get out of bed. She was rolling on the floor in absolute agony. And really, it took ages for the pain to go. I went to bed the night after having been in there, and I suffered. I didn't know that Mary Bennett had been affected like that. I got absolutely excruciating agony in my legs too. And I got a four-poster bed, and I got out of the bed, and I clung to one of the four posters, and I thought, when is this pain ever going to go? Oh, it was something. I suffered from cramp, and cramp can be painful. But the pain I was in that night just was something else. And eventually it went, and I thought my legs are going to be all battered and bruised the next day. They weren't. They weren't. And when Mary and I were just chatting about this one and we compared notes, we were both similarly affected. Now, Hazel wasn't affected like that, but she felt so ill the next day that, in fact, she didn't go to work for almost a whole week afterwards. This was the extraordinary part. You felt wonderful when you were in there, but heaven help you when you left afterwards. after you'd been in there. Oh, goodness me.
I guess speak to how it affects everyone differently.
Yes, but I don't know. Other people tell me they felt ill, but I certainly have never. I've been through the whole gamut of effects: headaches, nausea, goodness knows what.
But also, I mean, could that be attributed to some of the pesticides they're using on the crop? If people go into these things, they should probably be careful, correct?
Yes, very often in the early days, the farmers would say, I advise you not to go in because of the, we've just sprayed. Because they do spray, they spray for fungicide, insecticide, and pesticides.
Mhm.
And I think they do this several times a year. My cat, who I'd had, my grey cat, I don't know if I included, this is rather an awful story. I'd collected some barley from the field I'd been in there, and I put a bunch of it underneath the table in the dining room, and I don't use the dining room very often. It's used for other things now. And my lovely grey cat called Hero, he came in with me one day, and as I closed the door, I called to him, and he was underneath the table, and he was sucking the heads of the barley. And I had the devil's own job to get him out. And whenever I went into the dining room, he'd try and follow me and would go straight to the barley. And then I noticed he was changing in character. He was becoming slightly vicious.
Mm.
And he was a big cat. And one time, when I'd been, he'd come with me, and I said, no, you can't come in here. And I closed the door. And when I came out, I bent down to stroke him, and he reared up, and he was a big cat, and he was going to scratch me really badly. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is becoming dangerous. And so I tried all sorts of homeopathic things. Goodness knows what I tried. And he was on my bed one time, and I couldn't walk past him. I knew he was going to launch himself at me. And I thought, this is it. And people had said to me, for goodness sakes, get rid of that cat. He's really going to damage you quite badly. And I had to have him put down. Now, my belief is, Matt, that that field probably had been sprayed.
And then maybe an
And
effect.
that he got some chemical that had changed his brain, affected the chemical content of his brain.
Yeah, that's something people need to be made aware of. I'm sure when you take people into the circles, you get word from the farmer that it hasn't been recently sprayed. And so that's
No,
people
not
don't get
anymore,
sick.
unfortunately. But I always say to people, if you don't feel well, come out very quickly, because there was another one at Allborn one year, and I took people in there, and I went in with them, and I didn't feel at all well, but I just made sure they were all right, and then I came straight out.
Mhm.
And when I came out, there was a woman there, and I said, are you part of my group? And she said, yes. And I said, wouldn't you like to go in? And she said she'd put one foot in, and she had to come out.
She wasn't having it.
No.
Yeah.
And the circles are very strange. There was a fantastic one outside Avebury, in the field just beyond Avebury, about 5 years ago or so. And that was fantastically wonderful. And again, I was taking people on a tour, and they loved it so much I couldn't get them out to go to lunch. I did get them out eventually, but with a lot of poking and prodding. And after lunch, we went into one, which I didn't mention anything about it, and they came out fairly quickly.
Mm.
And I said to them, you are actually very sensitive, because that one's man-made. There was a friend of mine, again, Mary Bennett, in Avebury. And I said to her, that one just beyond Avebury, I said, is fantastic. Oh, she said, I think all the circles are being man-made now. And I said, this one isn't, I can tell you. And also round Avebury, the energy lines, it's so powerful all around there. And she said, all right, I'll go in. And she didn't. And at the end of the season, just before it was going to be halved, I said, Mary, honestly, you really should go into that one. It's all very well saying it's man-made, but you won't know until you go in. Certainly, by then, physically, you wouldn't be able to tell, but the energy there. And she said, she rang me and she said, Lucy, this is very strange. I wasn't allowed in.
What do you mean?
The circle would not let her in.
So she would not go in. She felt overwhelmingly compelled to not go in.
No, the circle would not let her in.
But what do you mean by that?
Physically, she felt she couldn't go in. She was stopped physically.
She felt, so she was physically making an attempt to enter, and she
Yes.
felt she
And
couldn't do that.
She couldn't.
And who is this again? This is Mary?
Somebody called Mary Bennett, who's a friend of mine.
What does
And it's rather if you hit a wall of plasma.
You wrote about this in your book. Okay.
Yes, it's very, I think she must have hit a wall, a plasma wall,
Yes.
which just prevents you from going in.
That's
Because she
amazing.
said she really tried. And she said she just couldn't go in.
That is incredible.
Yes.
Can we talk about plasma? Do you have enough time? Do you have to get going here?
What time is it?
It's 10:24 my time, so maybe 3:24 your time.
Shall we talk for another 10 minutes?
That's okay. Yeah, I'd love to. Could we bring up, I'd love to pull up one of those other crop circles. Maybe we could talk about that and then we can wrap it up.
Plasma, there are 4 states of matter in the cosmos. So 4 phases of matter. You've got the solid, gas, and liquid. And then the 4th one is plasma. And plasma occupies about 99.9% of the matter of the cosmos. And it's quite elusive. The way matter, or you see because you don't see matter, but you see the effect of matter when you're walking along the road at night and you have the lights, the lampposts, and there's a sort of halo around, and that is plasma. And also, if you're driving, car lamps, car lights, often there's a halo around those. Do you recall that? And that, again, is plasma.
Interesting.
And the effect, this was an extraordinary one. This was one which a farmer had lost his wife after a 14-year battle with breast cancer. She eventually succumbed. And the next year, this beautiful one, like a rose, which you showed a moment ago, with many layers to it. It was just beautiful. This one appeared in his field, and rose symbolizes love. And that's why I called it the symbol of love. It was just beautiful. And again, I did my tests in there. Later on in the season, a group of Spaniards, went to see somebody called Charlie Mallet and asked him where this formation was. And he said,
This one.
that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
The Afghan rose. And he said, I just think it's so beautiful. And he said, I think it's been harvested. But he told them where it was. And they got to the edge of the field, and it was completely harvested. And you couldn't see, just stubble, whether the harvester had gone over it. And suddenly, in the center, not in the center, but in part of the field, there was a little tornado. And they thought, that's extraordinary. And they walked towards where the tornado had been, and lo and behold, they found themselves in the center of what had been the crop circle. And you can distinguish this quite easily because the crop is flat where it had been laid. And so they had found they'd walked straight into the center of the circle.
Where this tornado was.
Where the tornado had been. Yes. Wasn't that extraordinary?
That's interesting.
And so they stayed there for some time, and then they went out, but one girl remained. And she stayed in there, and she then saw, not far off, down the field, another little tornado. So she rushed towards it, and it was moving away. She rushed, she thought, I'll try and catch up with it, and she rushed along towards it, and suddenly, she couldn't go any further.
Wow.
She was, and this, Jim Lyon said, that is a plasma wall. She'd hit the plasma wall. She
Wow.
could not go any further. And another story, which backs that up, was somebody Barnes, Ray Barnes, who lived in Westbury. And he was a natural countryman. He used me as a dowsing rod for quite a lot of the energy lines. And I used to feel, I feel terrible sometimes. And he used to go for a walk every day. And there was one particular field that he loved. He actually saw a formation occurring. But just to get back to this one, it was on a day where it was quite a strange day, because when he got to the edge of the field, one side was sunny and the other side seemed to have a whole lot of smoke coming from the west. And again, it seemed to stop. And like I said, one side was completely sunny and the other side was full of smoke. It was just like a cut-off point.
Wow.
It had hit a wall of plasma.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That stuff exists. Wow. Lucy, you have so many stories. In your book, your book, Crop Circles and Energies, that is a fantastic book. I've read it over the last few weeks, and you have so many amazing scientific data that you've collected over the years. You get into some of the geometries of these. It's really a wonderful book. And
you're very kind. Please encourage people to buy it off my website, because
please tell everybody where they can find you.
Yes, I'm lucypringle.co.uk.
Yes, and I'll put links for all of this in the description below.
Would you do that?
Yes.
Yes, because it all helps the research, and I'm just so absolutely devoted to this research, and just hope that we're going to get some way in which we can further the research into Parkinson's. It means so much to me. I had my favorite cousin. He died of Parkinson's. He was a major academic. He was just such a clever, wonderful man, scientist. And yes, he died of Parkinson's. And I just see so many people with Parkinson's. Yes. And it's not a nice condition.
No. Can I ask one more question before I let you go? Have you seen any data or collected any data on multiple sclerosis, MS, or even Huntington's disease?
No, I haven't seen any particular research done on Huntington's disease or muscular sclerosis. A friend of mine actually suffers from that at the moment. But as the condition progresses, you get more and more limited in your movements. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a cruel condition.
Mm-hmm. Because MS is an autoimmune disorder, but like Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative. And so the dyskinesia that they're experiencing, these temporary reliefs, you guys are suspecting that has something to do with the endocrine system and releasing large amounts of dopamine to the brain. But you have some other ailments in there that were also autoimmune. I think rheumatoid arthritis.
Osteoporosis, yes, that was extraordinary. That was Diana Cousins. And also Dorothy Collis. Yes, both of them. And Dorothy Collis, that was a lovely one, taking her into one. And she wanted to sit down and meditate. And she said, "Oh, Lucy, you will have to pull me up when I finished." And I went off to sit and meditate. You've got to find your own place. This is where dowsing comes in, or your body tells you where you sit. And we both stopped. I finished meditating. And so I could see Dorothy, her head was all poking up, and she was standing up. And I went to her and I said, "Dorothy, you're standing up." She said, "I shot up like a cork out of a champagne bottle." And they just feel so wonderful. Do you know, it just makes me feel so absolutely wonderful too, Matt. When I take people on my tours, very often, this is a world in which we're heavily laden with worries. Financial, health, goodness knows what. All the troubles in the world. And people seem to be, their shoulders are up like that, and you can tell they're full of tension, and you can just see it all when they arrive. And you take them to a circle, and suddenly they are just starting to relax, and all this tension is slowly draining away. And it makes me feel brilliant, because at the end of the day, those are quite different people to the people who joined me that morning. And they're relaxed and they're happy, and it's just wonderful.
That seems like a great place to end the show, Lucy. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute delight. I'd love to invite you back on anytime you like. There's so
You're
much
very
to talk
kind.
about, and you're just a
Yes,
wealth of knowledge.
you're very kind. It's something that to me is a very special phenomenon, because it's almost educational. As I was saying, it encompasses so many different subjects.
Mm.
It's very special.
Yes, it's a wonderful phenomenon. I got into it because of the geometry aspect of it. I instruct
Yes, because you're a
geometry.
geometer, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm a geometry instructor, and then I got really into sacred geometry, which eventually led me to the crop circle phenomenon.
Yes.
Which
And you've interviewed Karen Alexander. She's become an expert in it. She's very good.
Yes, and she teaches classes on drawing, and I think there's some therapeutic benefits to drawing out the formations. There's something with our psychology and our mind.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure as it evolves, must be some sort of spiritual connection, I'm sure.
And Carl Jung, I think, famously said that mandala drawing is therapeutic for people that are suffering from mental illnesses. There's something there that orients the mind that we recognize that we may not be consciously aware of. I love that aspect of it too.
It's brilliant. And I gave a talk one time, the Labyrinth Society in New Mexico. And of course, that's wonderful, walking the labyrinth. Oh, my goodness me. You're walking your life. Have you done that? That is a very special thing.
And what is that? That's walking the labyrinth?
It's walking like walking your life, the path of your life. Labyrinths, yes.
I'll have
They're
to
very
look that up.
sacred. They're very sacred shapes.
So this is so explain to me what this is. That you actually walk in something?
Yes, you can construct a labyrinth. It's various spirals, and you can different shapes, and you just walk round. You follow. It's not like a maze where maze come to dead ends. This one is you follow the path, just been laid out in different shapes or things, sizes and things, and you just start walking. And it's a very spiritual thing, because you're walking along slowly. Your mind seems to change, and rather like going into a circle, in fact. It has a very large similarity. And I was giving a talk to the Labyrinth Society one year in New Mexico. I've traveled the world, and it's lovely that so many different countries have people who are sufficiently open-minded to want to embrace this particular subject.
I think there's a lot to learn, and I think there's going to be something that's launched from this, or this will at least spark the brain that gets excited to go down one of these avenues of education. That I think something will be launched out of this in the future.
I hope so. I hope so. And I take tours. I've got 2 tours this summer. One ends with a private entry tour into Stonehenge in the evening. That's an optional extra. That is special.
I'll bet.
That you go up to the stones. And then the other one is a flight, little airplane over the circles. And that again, and over Avery and the sacred places. That's wonderful. And those are one's in July and one's in the beginning of August, the 1st of August.
People can look at that on your website?
If they go onto my website, yes, they can get in touch with me.
All right. Lucy, it's been wonderful chatting with you today. I would really like to talk to you again sometime. That's great. But yeah.
See what happens. Every year is different.
Yeah. I'd love to come over there. I've got to see one of these things for myself. I've been talking about
Yes.
this now on the show for a couple months. So I've absolutely excited. I've been invited over there by a couple of different researchers. I got to carve out some time and get over there and check this out.
Yes, there you are.
Yeah. You have a wonderful day, Lucy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.